My name is Arden L. Marlowe. I'm 25 years old. If you had told me a year ago that I'd end up in a legal war with my own uncle, I would have laughed, or cried, or both. Because back then, the only person I trusted to stand by me, my grandmother, was still alive. And as long as she was here, I felt like life couldn't swallow me whole. But then she died. Suddenly, quietly, cruelly. She was the only stability I'd ever known, the one who raised me after my parents were crushed to death in a car accident when I was 12. Richard, my uncle, refused to take me in. I still remember the meeting with the social worker, the hollow echo of her pen tapping on a clipboard, and Richard's polished voice saying, "She needs specialized care, emotional stability. My business requires too much attention." Translation: a grieving orphan would ruin my image. Grandma didn't hesitate for a second. She opened her arms, her home, her heart, and she kept me alive in ways therapy still hasn't fully untangled. So when she died last year and left me her house, a modest, aging, memory-filled structure that smelled like lavender and old photo albums, I understood exactly what she meant. This is your home now. You deserve something safe. But Richard saw something very different. At the will reading, he stiffened when the lawyer announced the house was mine. His jaw twitched, his eyes flickered in disbelief, and he said the words that set everything in motion. "That house should go to family." As if I wasn't standing right there in my Goodwill black dress, trying not to dissolve into tears, while the only parent I'd ever known was being divided into legal language. I remember turning toward him, the lawyer's voice fading into a drone. His eyes avoided mine. He wasn't grieving. He was calculating, already preparing his next move. He lost no time. Within a week, Richard was calling relatives with his patented tone, concern laced with poison. Arden's too young for home ownership. She's still fragile from losing her parents so young. She can't handle property taxes, maintenance, or legal responsibilities. He made my grief sound like incompetence. Meanwhile, I was drowning in freelance graphic design work that paid in peanuts and exposure, trying to make rent while juggling clients who wanted entire branding packages at dollar store prices. Grandpa's house wasn't some luxury estate. It was a small, worn-down place with peeling paint, creaky floorboards, and a sagging porch. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was hers. The legal battle began slowly, deceptively, like a stain creeping across fabric. First came Richard's concerns, framed as kindly advice. Then came formal accusations. Then came the petition questioning Grandma's mental state. Age-related cognitive decline, his lawyer argued, shaking his head with dramatic pity. It was complete fiction. Grandma had been sharp enough to correct my grammar a week before she died. She drove, she baked, she beat anyone in the family at Scrabble without apology. The depositions were torture. I sat in those two bright conference rooms under fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps, listening to Richard's lawyer twist every loving moment I had with Grandma into something sinister. "Isn't it true your visits increased as she aged? She paid for some of your art supplies, didn't she? She drove you to interviews. Why such devotion?" I answered every question with the truth. I loved her. She loved me. She raised me. But they weren't listening. Richard sat across from me with a mask of paternal disappointment, pretending to be the noble son forced to protect his mother's estate from a manipulative granddaughter. I wanted to scream. Instead, I clenched my fists under the table and held Grandma's handkerchief in my lap until my nails left marks in my palms. The financial strain punched harder than the accusations. Legal fees piled up faster than my freelance checks. Some months I wondered if I'd have to sell the very house I was fighting for just to stay solvent. Then came the real blow. Mrs. Chen, the warm-hearted bakery owner who'd always slipped me extra pastries, pulled me aside after I delivered her new menu design. "I shouldn't say anything," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if the potted plants were spies. "But someone's been calling people around town, warning them not to work with you." My stomach dropped. "What kind of warnings?" I asked. She sighed. "That you're unreliable, that you're unstable, that you're dealing with serious legal trouble." Richard! I felt it in my bones. He wasn't just fighting me in court. He was trying to starve my future until I broke. That night, I drove to Dad's house. Well, the house where my father grew up, because I'd been digitizing photo albums for him. He'd been trying to stay neutral, or at least pretend he was. I didn't blame him. Richard was his older brother. Their dynamic was carved in stone decades before I arrived. As I was in the kitchen, sorting photos, I heard Richard's voice float from the living room. I froze. The sliding door was cracked just enough for the sound to slip through. "She can't afford the property taxes," Richard was saying, smug satisfaction dripping from every word. "Her little design business is falling apart. I've made some strategic calls. Soon she'll have no choice but to sell." My heart pounded. Dad said, "Richard, that's enough. Mom left her the house for a reason." "That girl?" Richard scoffed. "She's a burden. She always has been, ever since the accident. Mom felt guilty about the crash, so she clung to Arden, but that doesn't mean we have to keep enabling her dysfunction." My throat tightened, rage burning beneath my skin. Dysfunction. Burden. A girl who should have been grateful. That's how he saw me. That's how he'd always seen me. Through the kitchen doorway, I pressed myself against the wall, trembling with a cocktail of fury and heartbreak. And then, for the first time in my life, the thought crystallized in my mind. If Richard wants a war, I'll finish it. I didn't sleep after overhearing Richard call me a burden. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of Grandma's house. My house. Listening to the quiet hum of the radiator and feeling something inside me harden into resolve. Richard wasn't just fighting me, he was erasing me. And he was good at it. He'd spent decades perfecting the role of the responsible son, the pillar of the community, the man everyone trusts. Meanwhile, I was the girl who worked from home, lived quietly, and avoided conflict. To the outside world, his version of reality would always sound more believable. But I wasn't 12 anymore. I wasn't powerless. And I wasn't alone. Or at least I tried not to be. My boyfriend Jordan showed up the next morning with 2 coffees and a bag of warm croissants. He looked tired. He always did now. But he offered a soft smile anyway. "You okay?" he asked, gently brushing my hair back from my face. "I overheard Richard last night," I said flatly. "He called me a burden. He said he's been making calls to ruin my business." "Arden." Jordan set the coffee down and reached for my hand. "He's trying to break you. That means you're in his way." "That's not comforting," I said. "It's not meant to be. It's meant to be reality." He squeezed my hand, but there was something in his eyes, not doubt exactly, but fatigue. I didn't blame him. Loving someone at war is hard. Still, the tension between us grew with each legal blow Richard struck, especially because Jordan's ex, Tessa, worked at a law office connected to Richard's circle. She wasn't a villain. She was annoyingly considerate, in fact. She even sent me a message once offering condolences after Grandma's death. But every time her name popped up in conversation, I felt a tightness in my chest. Not jealousy, fear. Because Richard had a way of pulling people into his orbit, even indirectly, and I couldn't shake the worry that Tessa's proximity to Richard's network might somehow hurt us. Jordan insisted she wasn't involved in any of Richard's schemes. I believed him, about 90%. The other 10% kept whispering, "Richard always has leverage." 2 weeks later, the sabotage became impossible to ignore. A longtime client emailed to cancel a project with a vague apology. Then another ghosted me. Then 3 more. Finally, Mrs. Chen quietly told me the truth. "Someone called pretending to be from the Chamber of Commerce," she whispered, leaning over the bakery counter. "He said you had legal instability, that your business might collapse soon." My stomach twisted. "Did he say his name?" I asked. "No," she said, "but his voice, it sounded familiar." Richard. He wasn't taking my inheritance because he needed the house. He was taking it because he needed me to have nothing. I left the bakery shaking. By the time I got home, I made a decision. I needed leverage, not moral leverage, not emotional leverage, real leverage, the kind that would destroy him completely. It didn't take long to find his patterns. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he left the office around 2 p.m., always alone, always in freshly applied cologne that wasn't the one Aunt Carol bought him for Christmas. He'd call the house around 5 p.m., saying something like, "Running late, client meeting dragged." He'd come home at 6, freshly showered. It wasn't business, it was choreography. So one Thursday I followed him. He didn't notice me. People like Richard never thought to look behind them. They assumed the world moved around their convenience, not the other way around. My heart thundered as I trailed his silver Mercedes down Highway 9. At first, I thought he was actually going to a commercial property, but then he turned left into the parking lot of the Sunset Motel. A motel, a grim, lonely roadside place with peeling paint and flickering neon. I parked behind an abandoned gas station, lifted the telephoto lens on my camera, and waited. 5 minutes later, a red Honda Civic pulled in. Linda Martinez stepped out, Richard's secretary of 8 years. She looked hesitant at first, scanning the lot. Then Richard emerged from his car. The moment he reached her, any trace of hesitation disappeared. They kissed like they'd been waiting all day to breathe. Not affectionate, not sweet. Raw. hungry, completely oblivious to the world around them. My stomach twisted, not with shock, but with grim confirmation. He wasn't just cheating, he was betraying Aunt Carol, who adored him, with the enthusiasm of a man who'd been doing it for years. I snapped photo after photo, each one clearer than the last. Linda's hand on his chest. Richard's fingers tangled in her hair, the way he pressed her against the door of his car like a scene from a movie. Then they disappeared into room 237. For 3 hours. I waited, camera ready, heart pounding with a mix of rage and icy clarity. When they came out, disheveled and laughing quietly, I photographed that too. The evidence was perfect, but I needed more. Affairs break marriages, not reputations, and certainly not legal battles. So over the next weeks, I gathered everything. Tuesdays and Thursdays, always the same room. Receipts from nearby restaurants where he paid in cash. Photos of their interactions, subtle and not so subtle. Screenshots of motel bookings I found open on Richard's shared office computer during a family dinner. But the turning point came unexpectedly. One night during a family gathering, Richard left the living room to check an important work email on Grandma's old desktop, left in the corner like a relic. He didn't log out. He never logged out. He thought no one in the family knew enough about computers to care. I walked past the room later, glanced at the screen, and froze. It wasn't just affair emails. It wasn't even the financial flirtations with Linda. It was spreadsheets, encrypted files, accounts, deposits, withdrawals. A dizzying pattern. Client deposits used to pay off earlier clients, hidden transfers, shell accounts, money misplaced, then rediscovered. Charts looping back on themselves like a snake eating its own tail. Recognition hit me like a punch. This wasn't infidelity. It was a Ponzi scheme. Richard wasn't just trying to steal my inheritance. He was using my fight, my vulnerability, as camouflage while he siphoned money from half the county, my dig. If the truth surfaced, his empire would crumble instantly. And he knew it. That's why he needed my house. My silence. My downfall. Because if I was discredited, no one would believe me when the real truth surfaced. He had everything. Praise, power, prestige. All built on lies. But now I had everything. Photos, financial records, text messages Linda accidentally forwarded to me, evidence of fraud, infidelity, deceit, the entire story. Enough to destroy him in one blow. But I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted every member of our family to see the truth all at once. So I spent weeks building a slideshow titled Family Memories. Through the years, the first half was innocent, nostalgic, warm, disarming. The last half would obliterate his kingdom. As I saved the final file and closed my laptop, I whispered the words that had been building inside me since the night Richard called me a burden. I'm done surviving. It's time to win. The next 2 weeks felt like waiting for a storm I had summoned myself, one that kept growing, gathering weight, gathering truth. I moved through each day quietly, letting Richard continue his performance as the heroic, grieving son fighting to save the family legacy from his manipulative niece. He had no idea that every word he spoke, every lie he repeated, every pity-filled sigh he offered relatives was about to detonate in his hands. I finalized every slide, tested the projector 3 times, organized every file like ammunition. But I didn't go in blind. I wanted to know who Richard really was when no one was watching. And what I found made the affair look like a warm-up act. The digital trail was grotesque. Richard had grown sloppy with confidence over the years. He reused passwords, left email tabs open, forwarded documents to the wrong contacts. Thank you, Linda. Stored incriminating files in hidden folders with names like Archive Old and Receipts 2018 Taxes. I stayed up night after night reading through his correspondence like a detective glued to the final puzzle. The affair was the least shocking part. The financial fraud? That was a different universe of betrayal. Richard Harrison, the man plastered on bus stop benches, the man spoken about in town like a benevolent king, was siphoning money from innocent families trying to buy their first homes. He used client deposits to pay earlier debts. He forged escrow transfers. He altered investment reports. He faked property records. For 4 years, he'd maintained a real estate empire by quietly cannibalizing it from the inside. It wasn't desperation. It was strategy. And Linda was fully involved. Their text messages weren't just sexual fantasies. They were confessions. Once that will is overturned, we liquidate the house. That will free up the cash we need. Florida will be a clean slate. No needy relatives, no dead weight. Dead weight? That was me. That was Carol. That was everyone who loved him. And then the message that snapped the last bit of mercy inside me. Can't wait until I never have to hear Carol talk about her garden again. I swear, the woman drains the life out of me. I heard my breath catch at that one. Carol adored him, supported him, believed in him. She brought him coffee during late-night paperwork sessions, packed him lunches, stayed up until he came home from late meetings. All while he exchanged texts with Linda, making fun of her weight, her cooking, her anxiety, her libido. The cruelty was breathtaking. How could someone build an entire identity around being a family man while dismantling his own household piece by piece? I printed the worst messages, carefully curating the ones that revealed his character, not just his lust. Some messages showed longing, some showed contempt, but the ones that revealed his schemes, those were the killing blows. While collecting evidence, I questioned whether I should tell Carol privately, spare her the public humiliation. But every time I imagined her alone in her kitchen, humming softly while preparing Richard's favorite casserole, thinking her marriage was real, my anger boiled all over again. Richard deserved to be exposed in the same spotlight he used to control everyone else. And Carol deserved truth, not whispered pity and gentle warnings. I knew it would hurt her. I also knew she would never break free unless she saw the whole picture. And Richard had arranged for the perfect audience. The annual Harrison reunion was a sacred event, 60 people gathering at Uncle Tom's lake house for food, games, laughter, and Richard's yearly sermon about family values. He always stood near the stone fireplace, wineglass in hand, delivering lines crafted to make everyone tear up and praise him for his leadership. I often wondered if he practiced in the mirror. This year, he would get the biggest audience of his life, and his last. The reunion arrived on a breezy Saturday afternoon. Kids darted along the lake's edge, adults mingled by the grill, and I moved between rooms like a ghost holding a match. Jordan stayed close to me, sensing the tension. He tried to pull me aside once, offering a worried look. "You're really going to do this?" "Yes," I said simply. "Arden, this will destroy him." I met his eyes. "That's the point." But what I didn't say was, he already destroyed me. He just didn't expect I'd rebuild myself stronger. By early evening, the large common room buzzed with warm chatter. The smell of roasted chicken and grilled vegetables lingered in the air. Fairy lights glowed across the beams. Uncle Tom clapped his hands for attention. "All right, everyone, time for our slideshow before Richard's annual speech." Perfect. I connected my laptop to the projector. My hands trembled slightly. Jordan squeezed my shoulder once and stepped back. The first slides were innocent. Grandma's garden, Christmas photos, birthdays, baby pictures, weddings, graduations. The room laughed and sighed in all the right places. Nostalgia wrapped around them like a blanket. Richard smiled from his seat, basking in it. He had no idea the blanket was doused in gasoline. As soon as the last wholesome photo faded, Richard stood up, smoothing his shirt, wineglass ready. "If I may," he began. "No," I said louder than I expected. "Not yet." The room quieted. I clicked the next slide. And the storm hit. Gasps rippled like shockwaves through the room. There was Richard, crystal clear, HD clarity, pressed up against Linda Martinez in the Sunset Motel parking lot. Hands tangled, bodies pressed together, timestamp blazing in the corner. Carol dropped the serving spoon she was holding. It clattered against the floor. Aunt Susan put a hand over her mouth. Uncle Tom whispered, "Jesus Christ." Richard's face froze, first confusion, then terror, then rage. "Turn that off," he shouted. I ignored him. Click. Them entering room 237. Click. Them leaving 3 hours later. Click. Receipts from the Grand View Resort. Click. His lies about a conference. Click. A screenshot of his text to Linda. "Once I get Arden's inheritance, we'll finally be free." A collective gasp shook the room. Jordan looked at me with wide eyes. Carol looked like her soul had left her body. Click. Another message. Pretending to love Carol is exhausting. Once the money is liquidated, we disappear. Click. Then the slide that broke the room apart. The Ponzi scheme files. Uncle Tom stepped closer to the projector, scanning line after line. His face drained. "This," he whispered, voice shaking, "is federal fraud." People shouted, others cried. Some backed away from Richard like he was radioactive. Richard lunged, face twisted in pure animal panic. He came straight for me. But before he could reach me, 2 of my cousins tackled him to the floor. "Get him out of here!" Uncle Tom roared, more furious than I'd ever seen. Richard thrashed and screamed, "She's lying! She's a pathological liar!" But no one believed him now. Not after the photos. The texts, the receipts, the financial evidence. Not after decades of worshiping him only to watch his mask fall apart in front of 60 witnesses. Carol stood frozen, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. I went to her and touched her arm gently. She whispered, "Thank you." But it wasn't gratitude. It was relief. The relief of a woman finally freed from a man who had been slowly killing her heart for years. I didn't feel triumph, or victory, or vengeance. I felt justice. And justice, I realized, could be terrifyingly quiet. Richard was dragged outside as he shouted obscenities, threats, and excuses. Minutes later, police sirens echoed along the lake. Several relatives called the authorities themselves. The FBI arrived not long after. Richard was arrested in front of the entire family. Fraud, money laundering, wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, the works. As they loaded him into the cruiser, he glared at me with seething hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. But it was, for him. And for me, it was finally beginning. The police cruiser's taillights disappeared down the long gravel driveway, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt like fog. Even the children had stopped running. Even the cicadas outside the lake house seemed to pause. Richard was gone, dragged away in handcuffs, screaming powerless, exposed. And in the stunned stillness he left behind, 60 members of my family stared at the space he had once occupied, trying to reconcile the devoted patriarch they thought they knew with the predator I had shown them. But the person I watched most closely was Carol. Carol stood frozen near the fireplace, hands trembling, eyes red and unfocused. She didn't speak, didn't sob, didn't lash out. She simply stared at the projector screen where the last slide still glowed faintly. The screenshot of Richard's final message to Linda. "Once I get the money, Carol can have the scraps." Aunt Susan rushed to her first, wrapping her arms around her shoulders. "Oh, honey, I am so sorry." Carol didn't move at first. Then slowly she rested her head on Susan's shoulder and whispered, 30 years. I spent 30 years loving a lie." Her voice cracked, and it broke something inside me. For a moment I wondered if I'd gone too far, if exposing everything at once had been too cruel. But then Carol lifted her head, wiped her tears, and looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. "Thank you," she whispered, not bitter, not angry. "Grateful. Because even the truth that destroys you is better than a lie that rots you from the inside." The reunion ended early. People left in stunned clusters, some sobbing, others furious, many simply silent as they tried to rewrite decades of memory. Jordan drove me home. He didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Then finally, "You changed everything tonight." I swallowed. "I destroyed everything." "No," he said, gripping my hand. "You revealed it." I didn't know how to respond, because for a long time I wasn't sure which one I had done. What followed was chaos, but not for me. For Richard. The FBI investigation exploded overnight. He had been on their radar, but they lacked proof. My evidence became the missing anchor. Clients came forward, angry, betrayed, terrified. Local news stations ran the story for days. Beloved businessman arrested for multi-million-dollar fraud. Affair, financial crimes, and family deception revealed. Even regional outlets and national financial watchdogs picked it up. Richard's real estate empire collapsed literally within a week. Every account frozen, every property seized, every carefully curated lie unraveled. He lost everything. And then some. Linda was arrested 3 hours after Richard. She tried to play the innocent victim, but her messages were damning. Screenshots of her discussing money transfers, fake identities, upcoming escapes, and how that annoying little graphic designer needs to hurry up and give up the house. When confronted with the evidence, she broke down, not from guilt, but from fear, and admitted everything. She received 9 years in federal prison. Richard? 18. He pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence. Carol's divorce was swift and brutal, in her favor. She filed within days, citing adultery, emotional abuse, financial misconduct, and fraud. Her lawyer, who I helped connect her with, tore Richard's remaining assets apart like tissue paper. She won half of whatever was left after restitution, the right to sue him for emotional damages, property he'd attempted to hide, the final word in their narrative. But that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was seeing Carol step out of her own shadow. She moved to Sedona, Arizona, opened a pottery studio, joined an artists' collective, took up meditation, and slowly found color again in her life. She sent me a Christmas card recently. She was standing in a sunlit workshop, hands covered in clay, smiling with a peace I'd never seen on her face. On the back, she wrote, "I never knew freedom could look like this. Thank you for pulling off my blindfold." Meanwhile, the families Richard stole from began recovering. Through federal insurance programs, restitution funds, and asset recovery, most eventually reclaimed their savings, though not without years of paperwork and pain. Some sent me thank you cards. One family even mailed me a small watercolor painting of their new house with a note. "You saved our future." Another wrote, "You protected our daughter's college fund. We will never forget this." And then there was this letter from an FBI agent. "Your evidence helped us identify a pattern across 6 states leading to the recovery of over $50 million in stolen assets. You should be immensely proud." I read that line 100 times. Because pride wasn't something I grew up holding easily. When I finally moved into Grandma's house, my house, for good, it didn't feel haunted by Richard's shadow. It felt restored, reclaimed, mine in a way it had never been before. I renovated the kitchen exactly how Grandma dreamed. Granite countertops, modern appliances, a big center island, warm under-cabinet lights that glow softly in the evenings. In that kitchen, I cook real meals now, meals she would have smiled at. My graphic design business? It flourished after the documentary and podcast coverage. Clients reached out not because I was a victim, but because I stood up, fought back, and exposed a predator. People value courage more than perfection. I learned that the hard way. Sometimes, late at night, I stand in Grandma's garden, newly restored, blooming, alive, and I think about the girl I used to be, afraid to confront Richard, afraid to speak up, afraid to take up space. That girl died the night I clicked next slide. Now there is only me, whole, unbroken, owning my story. On my desk, I keep 2 framed photos side by side, Grandma kneeling in her garden, smiling with her hands in the soil. And right next to it, the exact moment Richard realized his 30-year empire was crumbling in front of everyone he ever manipulated. One picture reminds me what love looks like. The other reminds me what truth can do. Justice isn't loud or glamorous. Sometimes justice is just a slideshow. A truth revealed. A mask removed. A life reclaimed.